So I have Senator David Norris, who's hoping to get the presidential nomination. Thanks very much for coming into it, Senator.
Well, it's a real pleasure, and I'm delighted to have had the tour of the office as well.
Excellent.
Met all the staff.
Everyone's happy to meet you.
And I was asking for somebody from Laois, and we couldn't find one. But then I discovered that the head honcho is from Laois, so Laois rules.
Absolutely. So I suppose we'll start with the very obvious questions. Why should we vote for you as President of Ireland?
Well, obviously I consider myself the best candidate. That's a precondition. I mean, every person who puts themselves forward would need to consider themselves the best candidate. And I say this with no intention to disparage any of the other candidates. But I think I have the qualities that are required. I'm positive. I'm energetic. I have lots of ideas. I also understand the role of the President very well. I know the Constitution, and I've been involved actively in politics, and I've been friend with the last two presidents. I've watched their career with great interest, and in particular, I was one of the 20 signatories on Mary Robinson's nomination. So I've learned from them, and I think we need somebody dynamic and inclusive. And I feel, I hope without being arrogant, that I fit that bill.
How important do you feel the role of the President is, and the office of the President is for Ireland?
Well, the role of the President is circumscribed by the Constitution. I mean, you're not Taoiseach, you're not Minister for Finance. Those are completely other jobs, and they require other talents. But the role of the President is, to a certain extent, titular and ceremonial. And I'm sure later on we'll get into some of the other aspects, because they have particular legal functions. But I think that in a situation like this, where the mood of the country is still depressed, and I was just listening in the car radio on the way in to a Europe-wide survey that shows the increase in suicide levels, which is extremely sad, and they're directly correlating it with the economic situation and the mood of the whole of Europe. I think it's important to have some central figure, and particularly one who's independent, who's not associated or allied or being promoted in any sense by any of the political parties. Now, I have friends in all the political parties, and I work closely with them, but I give them a smack when they need it. I will be critical of both government and opposition, and that's the great luxury of being an independent. And I am a truly independent candidate. I know there are Fianna Fáil independents, Fine Gael independents, all kinds of independents, but I am one of certainly a tiny group, not only on my own, who is an independent, who's been active politically, but always as an independent mind, independent in thought and action. I think those kind of things are useful in a president, and I think at this time we need somebody like that. Now, I've heard people saying we should abolish the presidency. I think that's very much a minority, and particularly after the triumph of the last two. But if we did, we'd certainly be unique. Or perhaps it would be a talking point. So there could be that positive element to it. But it would be just quite extraordinary not to have a head of state. Every state has a symbolic head of state. And I think we need to think very carefully before we abolish that office. So I think in these circumstances, we need it more than ever.
So getting on to the idea of the nomination and all the processes in behind that, what can the average voter do to make sure your name gets onto the ballot paper?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy that there seems to be a considerable groundswell of popular support for my candidacy. And a lot of people don't know that they can vote, because there hasn't been an election for 14 years. And I believe that my candidacy, and I was the first person to declare on the 14th of March, of this year, and to make a very vigorous bid. And I think that people were surprised, particularly the political parties, that there was such support for somebody with my background. So what people can do, first of all, is I'm delighted that people are enthusiastic, that they do know now increasingly that yes, they do have a vote in it. They can contact their local authorities, their local councils, because I'm approaching various county councils still, and gradually making progress in this area. They can get onto the local authorities, onto the local councils, and they can visit the website, which is www.norrisforpresident.ie, and on that they'll find a lot of information, including how to register. Because there may be people of great goodwill out there who would give me a vote, and then they'll suddenly find when it's too late they're not on the register.
Well, I think one of certainly with the last general election, there was such an momentum for people to get up and get voting.
Yes.
There's a lot more people now on the register.
Which is wonderful.
Which is exactly what we want, really. Are you finding it difficult to get the nomination? Like how are you being received in the county councils and places like that?
Well, it's rather interesting, and I'm learning all the time. And I think you have to be prepared to learn. So it's a very good and interesting experience. First thing I'll say is I have met nothing but courtesy and goodwill. And I've also met a large measure of support. But politics is a very interesting game, and it's not always on the surface. And although Micheál Martin indicated very wisely, I think, that the whip would be removed at national level, somehow it manages to get reinserted at local level. Yeah. And I have people from council say, well, you know, you've made a really brilliant pitch, but you know the game. It's real politique, it's a numbers game. So if Fianna Fáil had the whip on, and then Fine Gael originally blocked me, and when that came out in Longford, and there was an unusual moment of political honesty when Paddy Belcher was a thoroughly decent man, said, you know, this is what we've been told, and that got onto Twitter. It was murder. So now I think they're actually, in some instances, just holding back and not voting. And that gives Fianna Fáil an automatic majority. So that makes things difficult. But I've always liked challenges. Nobody at the moment has any nominations. Because legally, and I'm not sure if all the candidates understand this, but legally you cannot be nominated until the returning officer is appointed. And that won't happen until September. Yeah. But curiously, the history of this thing is very interesting because I wrote to every single council and every single councillor indicating I was interested in taking this route as one approach. And a number have invited me already, and I'll be seeing some more over the next month. But one of the ones that I hadn't actually spoken to yet, Fingal, a combination of Labour and Independence, put my name forward, and they very cleverly put it in the form of a resolution saying the Fingal Council would commit themselves to nominating me when that process was open. So it was kind of a promissory note. And that has been followed by my colleagues in the race, particularly Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Davis.
And one of the members asked, would you be willing, should it come to it, to go to maybe one of the smaller Dáil parties to secure a nomination, or do you see it as being more important to remain as an independent, as you've said?
Well, first of all, I shall absolutely remain as an independent. There is no question whatever of that. But each member of a party is elected by the people in their electoral area. So each of them have a mandate. Yeah. So each of those has the constitutional capacity to nominate as an individual. Now, I welcome the support for any party, but I'm not joining a party. And that was suggested to me, and I said absolutely no. There were also muted suggestions left lying around for me when they were looking for an agreed candidate. Would I consider it? And I said absolutely not, because I want there to be an election. Because the presidency of Ireland does not belong to any party. It belongs to the people of Ireland. If the people of Ireland want to vote for somebody who's a member of a party, that's perfectly legitimate, and one has to accept it. I'm presenting myself as someone who is beyond the parties. I'm not saying I'm above the parties, because I respect the role that the parties play in Irish politics, and I don't think we could have a coherent government without the parties. But I'm an independent. That's a great luxury, it's a great privilege, and I respect that. But I see nothing wrong in accepting, if I needed the numbers to be made up, and if individuals from the smaller parties were prepared to support me, then of course I'd accept them. I mean, how could I possibly second guess the will of the Irish people, who by voting for them have given them the right to nominate?
Excellent. I'll move on to some of the more kind of political questions. Yeah. Quite a few people have expressed some concern almost that if you become the president, you're going to have less of an opportunity to affect change. And do you feel that you're still going to be able to work towards LGBT rights or marriage rights, equal marriage rights? And somebody even mentioned the legalization of cannabis.
Yeah.
So, what do you feel that a president can do to address these issues and to move the issues forward?
Well, can I first thank your questioners, because I found that those questions very flattering. Because what we're saying is that I'm somebody who has been involved on the side of the people, and of ordinary people with real problems, and that I've been successful, and that I've been a good campaigner. And they seem to be afraid that I lose the capacity to alter things. Well, the answer to that, in my opinion, is that I have given 40 years of life to public service, 25 of them in Shannon Aaron. I've been involved in various campaigning groups in terms of gay rights, in terms of preserving Georgia in Dublin, in terms of promoting the works of Joyce and Bloomsdale, all this kind of stuff, all of which have been successful. And I can understand people might think, well, I hope he's not muzzled. And people have said that to me, and I really find that very flattering. But to be a campaigning backbencher is one thing. To be President of Ireland is another thing. And it is hugely significant. It is the highest office in the land. And it is a legitimate ambition for any politician with a good track record. And I do think I have a good track record. Now, my positions on all the issues you mentioned are very well known. And when I came out of them first, they were seen as very radical. Now they're virtually all mainstream. And I would point to the record of my old colleague and friend from Trinity, Mary Robinson. Mary Robinson was a notable feminist in her day. She was a superb barrister. She took my case. Now, your membership, and I know it is huge, but I should think the profile, the age profile, is probably younger than myself.
Yes.
So they may not have the memories that I have. And my memories are of an Ireland where, for example, it was a criminal offence for two men to express their love for each other physically, even in private, and even though they're adult. Now, I took that case. We were ultimately successful. Mary Robinson was my barrister. Mrs. McGee on contraception, the same decent Dublin Catholic housewife with a heart condition. She was forbidden to use contraception, even though her doctor told her she was probably going to have a stroke if she had another child. That was dreadful. Young people don't believe that this original solution to that, Mr. Hoy's Irish solution to an Irish problem, where you had to get a prescription for a piece of rubber, for a condom.
You still charge that on it.
Isn't that daft? Isn't that daft? When it's not just a prophylactic, it's protection against transmission of disease. They should be urging people. Now, and then there's more into Burke's case about, women weren't allowed to sit on juries. They were deemed morally and intellectually incapable. That's all gone. So Mary Robinson was involved in all of those. She was a campaigner, she was a feminist, and then she became president. Now, to be the first woman president, that was a huge jump. And I remember because I was interviewed by all the international media at the time, because I was a friend of Mary's and because I was part of the campaign. And I think a similar jump will be made by electing somebody like myself, with the kind of background, with the kind of issues that I've campaigned in. And Mary Robinson didn't have to go on polemicizing women's rights afterwards. And I don't think I would have to do it. Point made, and you then unite the country.
As I draw a line under it and say, it's time to move on.
Job done. Next issue, which is restoring the mood. And I'm not apologetic about this country. I mean, I listen all the time to people saying we've got to restore the reputation and restore our image. Our image is wonderful. I mean, I just come back from America. I mean, they are fascinated. First of all, of course, historically by our literature, also by our science, by our industry, by the Celtic Tiger, which through foolishness, some of our leaders, a small cadre, a small golden circle, blew what was a real boom that was earned by the people. And I'm not accepting that our image is in tatters at all. And even, I don't agree with the financial system. I have strong reservations about it, and I think the interest rights of the people come paramount before any system. But even if you accept the system and the market, look what we've done. we have really shown ourselves to be an example of how to stand in adversity. We can't deny the adversity, but believe me, as far as I'm concerned, our image is good, and there should be somebody there saying that, saying we're a wonderful country. We have a high intelligence. We have an unusual level of creativity in the arts, in business, in science, everywhere. And I'm very happy to go out there and sell Ireland on those lines.
A couple of people have asked, it's an interesting question in light of what you said about the economic sort of gloom around all of the world, and not just ourselves. Would you take a pay cut?
Well, now I have already been asked that question, and sure it's out there. It's out there on my website, Norris.ie. You'll find that, because we have a facility where I answer questions and so on. So it's quite an interesting website, and some of it's interactive and all the rest of it. So I've already answered that, and I'm very happy to answer it again. My answer right at the beginning, and I wasn't expecting the question at all, was perfectly honest. First of all, I didn't know how much the income was. I gathered it was 300,000, it's now down to 250 or something like that. That's a huge amount of money.
It is.
And I presume I'd have a pension from the Senate. Well, that means, why would I need all that money? That's the first question I'd ask myself. The second is, what would be the best use for it? Now, I'm prepared to put a major slice of that aside. To be used, however, to improve the role of presidency, to make it more accessible to the people, because again, the presidency and all its attendant privileges like living in Ars Neutron and all the rest of it, that should be opened up. And I would be happy to use that money to advance the role of the presidency and to reinforce it, but I would not give money back to the government. First of all, to be a paltry amount in terms of the exchequer difficulties we have, so it would make no difference whatever. Secondly, I'm not confident that it wouldn't be wasted. And I think that judiciously applied to enhance the role of the presidency and to make that presidency more accessible to the people, I think that's a better use of the money. But I do not want it or need it for myself.
That's fair. Fairly comprehensive answer.
But there's one other aspect of it, and I've deliberately couched in those terms. I am not joining in an auction. I mean, I was the first person to say that. There was a gap. And then somebody else got in and said, I take X thousand.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that because I have respect for the office of presidency, and I think that vulgarised the whole thing, to have some kind of an auction over it. I've said what I've said, that's my position. And the other thing is, it's easy for me. It's easy for me because I have a pension, or I will have. In fact, I have several pensions because I'm entitled to an old age contributory pension, which I haven't taken.
Yes.
Because I don't believe that somebody who is not under financial stress, if they can afford not to take it, I think the decent thing is not to take it. But I grab the free travel with both hands because I'm no good at machines. But it's all very well for me. I'm a single man. I don't have children to educate. I've had another job. I have another pension. But there might be somebody, and I hope there will be, who comes from a background that isn't so privileged. And I tell you this, my entrance into the race has certainly opened up that possibility, and I hope it will be democratised. And I saw Vincent Brown the other night appealing for people to go on his panel and saying he wants them from all backgrounds, and I think in this republic we shouldn't consider class at all. I think it's an affront to start sorting people out into classes. But he said, and in particular we'd like someone for the working classes. Well, I consider I'm working class. I work very hard. But I know what he means. And I think somebody coming from that background, and somebody who, it shouldn't be inconceivable that somebody who's unemployed through no fault of their own, that in this situation has lost their job, man or woman, why shouldn't they have the right to run for the presidency? And suppose the people supported them. Maybe they would need that money. So I don't think it's appropriate to tie the hands of the next president, but I can give an undertaking I would not be taking all the money.
Another very interesting question. If you were elected and required to accept a state visit from somebody like the Pope or any other world leader for who represents a religion or a regime that perhaps preaches the evils of homosexuality and some of the other issues that you believe in. What would you do? Would you greet this person with open arms, or would you decline the visit?
Or you could not possibly decline the visit. That would create a major diplomatic incident. And I understand the role of the presidency, and the role of the presidency is not to express my personal opinions, some of which are quite trenchant. But the role of the president is to represent all the people. Now, you instanced the Pope. Now, curiously enough, I was on TV3 on the Sarah Carey show. This is quite some months ago, and she said, well, President McAleese has invited the Queen of England. It looks as if she may come. President Obama may be coming. Prince Albert of Monaco may be coming. What's left for you? And actually, off the top of my own head, I said, well, I know there is the Eucharistic Congress coming. It hasn't been on for 80 or 90 years. I remember seeing the footage of 1932 with Count John McCormack singing Panis Angelicus. It was absolutely beautiful, wonderful. And it is the Christian denomination to which the majority, overwhelming majority of people in this country have allegiance. So I would hardly insult them.
Of course.
So of course I would welcome the Pope. And you mentioned other people who might have very extreme ideas. I don't believe any Christian really would approve of the murder of people just because they're gay. That has happened in quite a number of countries, and I protested against it. But it wouldn't be my job to protest. I believe the Irish people would show their disapproval of these kind of really rather dreadful attitudes. I was going to call them un-Christian, but of course, if they're not Christian countries, you could hardly expect them to be Christian. But I think that the fact that these world leaders would be presented with a situation which they would have to treat with respect. Somebody who had been openly and directly elected by a democratic vote of the people of an independent republic. I would hope that maybe that would open their minds a little bit and make them think, well, we're all human beings. And perhaps if they started thinking, what would it like? What would it be like to be in the situation, for example, of those two young men who were hanged from the back of a lorry on a crane in front of a crowd of their fellow countrymen in front of whom they'd been shamed. I mean, my heart still bleeds all these years, and it must be 4 years at least since that happened. That was a black mark on the face of humanity. And I would hope that maybe having to realize that a modern, brilliant, leading European state has elected someone like myself, maybe that would open their eyes. But I would also have to emphasize, I have not presented myself as a gay president.
Yes.
I would be a president who happens to be gay.
Very good. I'm going to read this exactly as it was written because it's a bit in this one. Do you believe the religious oath as set out in Article 12, Paragraph 8 of the Constitution is discriminatory? And if so, what steps would you take to highlight this during the swearing-in ceremony? And I'll just read it out for anyone who isn't fully aware of it. It says, the President shall enter upon his office by taking and subscribing publicly, in the presence of members of both the Houses of the Oireachtas, the judges of the Supreme Court and of the High Court, and other public personages, the following declaration. In the presence of Almighty God, I do solemnly and sincerely promise and declare that I will maintain the Constitution of Ireland and uphold its laws, that I will fulfil my duties faithfully and conscientiously in accordance with the Constitution and the law, and that I may dedicate my abilities to the service and welfare of the people of Ireland. May God direct and sustain me. So, obviously this is an issue on the separation of state and religion. And so, could you, as somebody who's come out against these sorts of issues, could you say that? Could you swear?
Oh, I have no difficulty. But the first thing I would have to say is you're quite right. I have a long track record of speaking about the separation of church and state. I think it's good for both. And I say that because I'm a believing Christian. And I attend St. Patrick's Cathedral every Sunday morning, without fail. No radio or television broadcast has succeeded in seducing me away from my duty there. There have been very rare occasions when I haven't made it, but it's something that sustains my life. I don't expect it to be the same for everybody, but I have to tell you, quite a large number of my friends are agnostics or atheists. And I respect them. In fact, I respect them all the more. And I think sometimes, as a Christian, that if we lived our lives as if atheism were correct, then we might treat each other with greater gentleness, because it would mean that this is the only opportunity you have to experience the wonder of being alive. And maybe that would make us respect each other a bit more, but I wouldn't bank on it, because I don't think that either Hitler or Stalin or Chairman Mao had any strong religious beliefs, and they weren't exactly sensitive plans. So I would say this. First of all, nobody need to lose themselves into imagining that I have the slightest intention of creating an incident during the inauguration. That would be utterly inappropriate, and I won't do it. So don't expect that. Number two, personally, I have absolutely no difficulty with it. It expresses what I believe. I believe in the presence of Almighty God. Other people don't. And that's a matter for the Oireachtas to consider. It's not a matter for a president or a presidential candidate. But I'm perfectly certain that my atheist or agnostic friends can substitute in their own minds while I'm saying that in the absence of Almighty God, you know, either are just as good as far as I'm concerned. I happen to believe in the existence of Almighty God. Other people don't. So it's a question of presence or absence. And nobody can absolutely say that they are in either the presence or the absence of Almighty God. Because the greatest theologians and the greatest pastors, including Jesus Christ himself, are the ones who admit an element of doubt. And the ones that frighten me are the people who absolutely know. Whether they know that God doesn't exist, or they know what God wants, and they're the terribly dangerous people. The one who knows what God wants, and God intends, and God has instructed you to do this. It's a projection of their own personality a lot of the time, and they're imposing it on other people. So I have no difficulty with those. And I'd be surprised if too many people have either. But it wouldn't distress me if it was altered.
This is an interesting one. Maybe one of the most challenging questions I'll ask you today, in one sentence.
In one sentence? One
sentence.
This will be a first time.
What do you hope your presidency will be remembered for?
I think it will be remembered for bringing hope, vibrancy, a new vision, and a rebirth of the principles of our great republic.
Very good. If you were elected, what would you like to have at the end of your term that we didn't have at the beginning?
Well, I think it would be very arrogant for me to say that there's going to be a sudden waving of a wand and the whole of Ireland will change. I don't believe in that. I believe that you build on your predecessors, and every other president has. And that's what I would expect to do. They each were people of their time. And this became more focused as the presidency developed. And the last two in particular have been remarkable. So I believe that I would leave behind an Ireland in which diversity and inclusiveness are not just recognised as a civic obligation, as a duty under the European Convention on Human Rights and so on, but as something tremendously positive that delivers benefits. And now I'm reading two books about Daniel O'Connell at the moment, and he's a figure in Irish history that I feel has been to a certain extent marginalised and left behind, and I think that's wrong, because I think he was one of the greatest figures of our entire history. And I still haven't found the speech, but I'm determined eventually. And I've written to his biographer, Professor Patrick Gagan, who I heard speaking about him recently, to see if he can find it for me. It was about Catholic emancipation, so it must have been sometime in the 1820s. And he was being challenged by some of the Tory grandees, because they felt that if you extend liberty to these papists, as they called them, in some way you'd be diminishing their rights. Now, it's precisely the same argument you heard about marriage equality. You know, if you allow these people in, it'll... And O'Connell had the perfect answer. He said that human rights, liberty and freedom and respect are not finite qualities. It's not like the budget, the national cake, and if you take a slice out of this and give it to health, you get a smaller slice for arts and all the rest of it. instead it's quite the reverse. The more liberty and dignity and respect you give to other people, the more you have for yourself. And I'm absolutely convinced that that's true. And I'd like to help in that process. And for that reason, I think, diversity and inclusiveness, and I would very much hope to leave behind in Ireland with these qualities which are natural. They are quite natural to us as people, that they're brought out and recognised and celebrated.
Excellent. You mentioned earlier that you were in America recently and the attitude and positivity they feel towards Ireland. What would you do to kind of strengthen our reputation and our links with our various neighbours around the globe? And I mean, I think it's fair to consider America our neighbour now, because it's, you know,
Yes, America is absolutely our neighbour, because I mean there are parishes in the west of Ireland to say the next parish is Boston. Yes, I always love that, and you know it's true.
It is,
because there are people who've gone over there to America and they've retained. I mean, there are various towns. In fact, there's a mining town in the Midwest where people went over from a particular part of the west of Ireland, and they continue to speak Irish. In Newfoundland, there are fishermen from Waterford, and their generations are in South America. There are people in Argentina, for example. I remember meeting Don Eduardo O'Farrell, and he spoke perfect classical Spanish until he went into English, where he had a glorious Mullingar accent. It was fantastic. So we already have the ground prepared there. We have a diaspora who are interested, you know, and we have President Obama finding such an interesting association with Ireland. It's almost a requirement that you should find some Irish root, and people thought it would be a bit daft with President Obama, which in a way was a kind of unconscious racism. They just thought because he was dark-skinned he couldn't have any Irish roots. My goodness, they found them. They found them very directly. And I didn't realise that for years I sat having coffee in the common room in Trinity when I was on the staff there, under a portrait of his great-great-great-great-great-grand-uncle, who was a bishop, Bishop Carney, and he was also provost of Trinity College. So he was not only an emigrant from Ireland, pushed out by poor circumstances, even though he had this grand relation, right about the time of the famine, I think, but he was Church of Ireland. So again, there's our diversity. And we always celebrate John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and absolutely rightly. But a majority of Irish presidents, I think, have Irish roots, but we don't, in the Republic, always recognise it because they're from the Scots-Irish tradition. So we have a huge, inert possibility of goodwill there. And I remember fundraising in America when Mr. Keogh was the head of Coca-Cola. You know, there's a lot of people over there. So that's one thing. The other thing is, when the government decides on a visit, a trade mission, and we have very energetic people in the IDA, for example, it's part of the responsibility of the President to accompany that. And if you're a good speaker, and I flatter myself that I'm not stuck for a few words. You did give me one challenge, and that was to come up with one sentence. And to my surprise, I managed to do it. Because I've sometimes introduced that now Senator David Norris would say a few words. Don't think it's ever happened. You brought out the best in me. But I've seen Mary McAleese as president in Houston, Texas, address 100 hard-boiled Texan business people. She had them in the palm of her hand. Why? Because she wasn't using a PowerPoint presentation. She wasn't reading through notes. She was looking them right in the eye. And she was talking from her heart. And she had her statistics, as much as she needed, to support her case. I'm pretty good at taking a brief. I'm pretty good at addressing an audience. I have 30 years as a lecturer in Trinity. I was a very popular lecturer because I didn't read from a yellowing script. I've also, I think, been an efficient senator. So I have the experience of doing this. And I've also travelled all over the world on missions. I was a roving cultural ambassador for 3 months in Eastern Europe and Scandinavia in, I think, 1994, certainly in the early 1990s. I had a sabbatical from Trinity. In 1982, I represented Ireland in the media blitz right across the United States, Right. So I would certainly be happy to support that. I think that's a very important role. And then look at England. I mean, I always like quirky little things. And I didn't get into trouble. People were very surprised some years ago when I said, well, you know, the Queen of England is really quite Irish. If you look at her mother, the Queen Mother, who was such a wonderful woman, a woman described by Adolf Hitler as the most dangerous woman in Europe. Now that's my gal, that's the kind of person I like. But I mean, she puffed on a cigarette, she had a bottle of gin in the handbag, she punted on the horses. You know, what could be more Irish than that? And she's a direct descendant of Brian Brew. That makes the Queen a direct descendant of Brian Brew on her mother's side. Somebody challenged me on that recently and I got it researched. She's a direct descendant of Brian Brew on two separate distinct lines on her father's side. So here's somebody 3 times descended from Brian Brew. She's also a direct descendant of Hugh O'Neill, Earl of Tyrone. Now, do you remember when Ryan Tubridy was showing the Queen round from a vantage point? Well, Ryan Tubridy, I know his family, the Andrews. I remember his grandfather, Todd Andrews, who was out in 1916. And I also know that Ryan Tubridy was the subject of a programme, Who Do You Think You Are? And who do you think they found out he was? A direct descendant of Edward III, King of England. So you could, if you wanted to, write a headline about that visit saying, descendant of Irish rebel heroes, shown round Dublin by a descendant of British monarch.
Yeah.
And it'll be Ryan Tubridy showing around the Queen. So that shows how closely linked they are. And there are more Irish people in England than there are here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also speak some of the European languages, not terribly well, but enough to make a gesture. And I've been all over Europe and most of the known world, with the 2 exceptions of Russia and Japan, which I would like to visit.
Excellent. I'm going to start racing through this a little bit more because we're running a little short on time.
And you can tell me if you want to shorten the answer.
No problem. Where do you stand on transgender rights and the current lack of legal recognition in Ireland? Is there anything you would like?
Well, well, first of all, I have made my position quite clear in the Senate and the record could be looked at. We're in violation of European codes on this, and the matter will be addressed. And I'm very heartened by the fact that it is. I know and have supported Dr. Lydia Foy. And I think that the fact that this is seen as a human rights matter is very important. I've known for many years Michael Farrell, who is her legal advisor and who was one of the leaders of People's Democracy in Northern Ireland all those years ago, non-violent campaigner. And I salute this courageous woman who went through this difficulty. But that would not be in my hands. As President, I'm removed from that debate. But believe me, there are wonderful people in the Oireachtas, and particularly in Shannon. I mean, the Taoiseach's nominees were a most remarkable group of people, including Dr. Catherine Zappone, who has already spoken out on this issue, and in a way that highlights the legal and social issues in a very clear, very judicious manner.
Excellent. In 1976, the Minister for Defence called the then President a thundering disgrace, leading to the President's resignation. If elected, this member supposes that he wouldn't be entirely surprised to see something like that said of you. And what would you say to address that, and how do you handle such a criticism?
Well, you mean a criticism of me?
Of you?
By a minister?
Exactly.
Well, I'd be very surprised. I think they would have learned a lesson from that. And I don't anticipate being put in that situation, because I think the assumption behind that is that in some way I might invite it. Now, I've been a championing, campaigning person. I know how to behave as President of Ireland. And if a minister of the government did not know how to behave in the presence of the first citizen of the country, then it would be up to him or her to resign. It wouldn't be me. It would be them. And I believe the people of Ireland would support that view, and I think they'd give them pretty short shrift and they'd be gone. But I wouldn't go, and by the way, your quote is completely inaccurate, because I know exactly what was said, and it was much stronger language than that, but I'm not going to repeat it.
We would do a swear filters on the site.
Well, may I tell you this?
Yes.
It would be filtered out.
Yes.
And you probably know what it was called.
The next question was asked, What type of bills, that, if they came before you, would you refer to the Supreme Court on a moral basis? Have you anything in your head already that?
Well, that's a misunderstanding. And whoever asked that question, a very interesting question, but it's based on a completely false premise. Because it doesn't take into account what the role of the President is and the functions that the President fulfills. It is not within the remit of the President, nor should it be, to refuse to sign bills that he or she simply doesn't like, thinks are wrong-headed, or whatever it is. The only power in terms of the reference of legislation to the Supreme Court is if the President feels when a bill is presented from the Oireachtas, having been duly passed by both houses, and having summoned the Council of State to listen to their advice, but he or she doesn't have to take that advice, has to listen to it, doesn't have to take it. If he or she still feels that that bill conflicts with the Constitution, then he or she has the prerogative to refer to the Supreme Court. And when the Supreme Court has decided, then that bill is set in stone. Now, I make that point because you have to be very judicious in exercising that power. Because if it is decided to refer the bill, and if the bill is found by the Supreme Court to be fully constitutional, then every single section of that bill is immune and would require a huge effort, and a referendum to change couldn't be changed by law. So I think you have to be very careful in exercising that power, and you have to accept what the Supreme Court says. There is no possibility of somebody saying, well, I just don't like that, so I'm not signing it. No.
Not an option.
I doubt if there will be any circumstance in which any reasonable person will be presented with something that they found so morally repulsive that they weren't able to sign it. But if they did, then they would have to resign. And that would make the statement to the people. But I don't anticipate that.
Do you think that 7 years is too long a term for President, or do you think there should be any need to change that?
Well, I knew what I was getting into, put it that way. But I would just point to the fact that more than 10 years ago, I made a detailed submission to the committee of the Oireachtas, the All-Party Committee, that were investigating the role of the presidency. And I pointed out, among other things, I was looking for democratising it, make it more accessible, make it more representative of the people, and also an easier burden. Because I know, for example, it's not a secret at all, because Daddy Hillary said it on the radio, and he was very good humoured about it. They made him do the first 7 years, and then they twisted his arm to do the second. And he said, come on, 14 years, you don't get that for murder. And I mean, there was a really good, light-hearted comment, and he didn't mean any disrespect to the presidency, but he was just pointing out that it is a very big commitment, 14 years. Now, our presidency is based on the French. It's modelled on that, even though ours is not an executive presidency, and they opted for 7 years. They've changed it, and they changed it over 10 years ago to 5, for practical reasons, and I urged those reasons on the committee. So I would have no difficulty if it was changed to 5, but I've entered the list in this campaign on the basis that it is 7. So,
very good.
You know, and the government actually have not come back with concrete proposals for a referendum.
So it's unlikely we'll see a change, certainly before.
I think so.
Final comment here on this sort of more political stuff. After you launched, you stated that all you needed were so many thousand signatures to secure your nomination. You were a quarter of the way up the hill to after securing the Finglas nomination. Were you aware that it required more than just signatures, or that perhaps you may have had some of the facts incorrect?
Well, that's an interesting question, but in fact your questioner is obviously a little bit confused and doesn't have the facts. I mean, first of all, I didn't say that you could getting all these things would get you in. I indicated at one point that 25% won Council's commitment is about 25%, that's true. But none of these things are fluid. None of these things are fixed, they're much more fluid than that. So there's a fundamental misunderstanding, but it's a good question because it highlights the situation at the moment. Now, in 1998, all of the parties signed up unanimously to a document that examined the role of the presidency. It was part 3 of a constitutional review. And anybody can look it up on the internet and find it, I've no doubt. And they'll see there that in the opening section they said that the process of nomination to the presidency of Ireland was undemocratic and unfair and should be reformed. And they made 3 suggestions. The first was that the 4 councils should be left intact. And I completely agree with that, because that is, you're touching the key and the root of local democracy and speaking to their representatives. And you're going around the country and you are asking to be allowed into the race. And I think that's very healthy. And so that's fine, they left that there as it is. They then said that the bar was set too high in terms of the numbers of Oireachtas members. So they suggested moving that from 20 down to 10. And the final thing was that the signatures, the validated signatures of 10,000 Irish citizens was a third way, and that on its own should be allowed to get you in. Now I have to tell you, I have tens of thousands of signatures, tens of thousands. So according to 2 of the 3 criteria, which in 1998 all parties unanimously accepted, I should, to use their own words, if the system was fair and democratic, be already in the race. But they chose not to pass those into legislation. And I undertook this challenge knowing that it was difficult. And I don't think it's right for me to complain, because I went into it knowing what the situation was. But I tell you this, I do think that my candidacy has raised these questions in a major way, and I think there will be required on government after this election to re-examine those recommendations. And I know it will be difficult for them because we're all a little bit selfish, you know. And at the moment, traditionally, the presidency has been a function of the party system, and it will be taking something away from them. But we, as a nation, I think, will look for generosity from the political party system in order to strengthen our country for everybody.
Very good. I'll move on. We're running out of time, so I'll just move through just some kind of personal questions about you the man, rather than you the politician. Do you feel that your openness about your sexuality will affect the campaign? And like, we still have a relatively conservative populace in a lot of ways. And do you think this is going to be a big problem?
I don't think so, really, because as I've said, I mean, I'm not running as a gay candidate or a gay president. I'm running as somebody who happens to be gay. And there's now a small but growing number of young gay representatives in Dáil Éireann. And the Taoiseach himself appointed Dr. Catherine Sapone to Shannon Éireann. So basically, I think it's a non-issue.
Very good. What current Irish politician do you most admire and respect, and why?
Well, I think that's, if you'll allow me to avoid the question, I think it's a little bit invidious, because I'm still practicing as a politician. And I think if I chose one of my colleagues, and there are many that I admire, I think the others would feel hurt and aggrieved and so on. I don't think it would be appropriate for a presidential candidate. But I can tell you this. The person who was my guide and mentor and my kind of shining star was the late Dr. Noel Brown, who was Minister for Health, challenged the system and brought a government down by trying to bring in a mother and child scheme that would look after nursing mothers and families in poor situations. And it's a reproach to this country that that was allowed to happen. But before that happened, he brought in measures that wiped the scourge of tuberculosis out of this island. And the people never forgot that for him. And I'll tell you something that I was saddened by. Michael D. Higgins and myself were the only two public representatives that attended his funeral in County Galway. Now, he was a man of international reputation. He was head and shoulders above everybody else in that government in 1950 to 51. And yet, there was no state representation. I thought that was a shame.
I want to just touch on the idea of, there was all this furore about age of consent and legislation and thoughts, your personal thoughts and so on, behind all that. This is an area I think that the Irish people have shied away from too much. What sort of reform would you like to see taking place in that sort of an area?
Well, the first thing I would say is this: that is absolutely outside the presidential campaign.
Yes.
It has nothing whatever to do with it, and the president could not, even if he or she wanted to, get involved in that. With regard to the issues of age of consent and all this kind of stuff, it's a complex area. It was something dealt with in the Oireachtas, and I spoke at length about it and cited legal precedent examples and predicted difficulties that would take place, and they're taking place as we speak, in which young Irish people are being injured. But I really am not going to go into all that stuff again, because it is complex, can't be answered in this format, won't be part of my campaign. That was then, now is now. But if people are interested, I've never shied away. As you say yourself, I'm an open book. And they'll find all those questions directly and clearly answered on the website, norrisforpresident.ie.
If you weren't running yourself, who do you think you might vote for?
Well, no, I'm certainly not going to answer that. Neither would you expect me to. But more power to you for asking.
One interesting question, and I think we'll finish up with this. Because you took your case against the Attorney General in '83, do you see that as being something that you did for Ireland, or something that, because this was you versus Ireland, that this is something that maybe you shouldn't be almost as proud to stand behind, because here's you questioning your nation?
No, I wasn't. I was questioning a law that was passed by a British Parliament late at night as an adjunct to a piece of legislation that had no connection with it. It was never discussed ever by an Irish thing. That's the worst of the two statutes. And the other one actually didn't apply to Ireland for over 100 years. And came in accidentally, historically. Now, it's all too academic for me to go into there. But I'll tell you this, I'm not a bit ashamed of it. I'm absolutely proud of it. And I'm proud not of myself. I am proud of the 1937 Constitution of Mr. de Valera, which gave me the right as a citizen to do that. So what I did was I showed respect for the Irish people, the Irish state, and in particular the Irish Constitution, by using it to assert my rights. And I was eventually vindicated. Now, you said that's the last question, and I'm very, very disappointed, because I was following the thread about the beards. And I wish you'd asked me about the beard.
I recently, I'll just put my head in it, I recently shaved off what was a beard about this long myself. And so I'm very much a beard supporter, all right. Do you think it's important that you keep the beard? Would you ever get rid of it for charity or anything like that?
No, I think it's rather a delightful question. But I would not expect anybody to vote for me because I had a beard. Just the same way I wouldn't expect anybody to vote for me because I was gay or because I was Church of Ireland. These just happen to be attributes. But one of the reasons I was disappointed you didn't ask about it was I was asked why I wore a beard once, and suddenly off the top of my head I came out with a genuine, original witticism. They said, why do you wear a beard? And I said, because it covers a multitude of chins. And can I tell you, it's been so successful that it's one of my 2 fashion statements. Because I go to Shepherd's in Wicklow Street, where Tony, the barber, has told me that people come in, and because I'm occasionally on television, they come in with a beard and they say, can you give me a David Norris? So I've given my name to a beard, and that's my second fashion statement, because the first one was surrounding Doomsday. You'll see a lot of people on the 16th of June with straw boaters, dark glasses, blazers, maybe brocade waistcoat, striped tie, white trousers, and a stick, silver top stick. I invented that. That doesn't appear anywhere in Ulysses. It's an amalgam of a series of different images that came into my mind over 40 years ago. One was a picture of Joyce sitting after an eye operation. He took a holiday in Torquay in Devon, in England. And some of the rest of it is assembled from different figures in both Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. But it does not occur in Ulysses. And I'm very proud of the fact that all over the world there are people dressing, you know. What a career I might have had if I wasn't
as a fashion designer.
If I wasn't going to be president of Ireland.
Excellent. Well, Senator David Norris, I thank you very much for your time. It's been a great pleasure, and that's enough.
Thank you very much indeed, Darren.